Hello and welcome to another edition of our podcast on all things recycling. Recycle, don't be a waster. In today's episode, we want to touch on e-waste. And somebody asked me the question recently that do I think New South Wales should they ban e-waste going to landfill in the similar way that Victoria, the state of Victoria, has. And a bit of the background on this, Victoria banned e-waste, i.e. computers, laptops, TVs, anything really, going to landfill from July 2019, so roughly 3 years ago. Whereas New South Wales, as far as I can see, does not have specific legislation against that. So this basically means that in theory it is illegal in Victoria to put e-waste into your garbage bin, your general waste bin for collection. And does that really make a big difference, or what does it actually do? I suppose I haven't been able to see any information about anybody being prosecuted for putting, batteries or e-waste or computers in their general waste bin. It hasn't been on the news. I haven't been able to find any articles about it. So to some extent, is it being enforced? Is it being is it creating an issue, or is it even being enforced down in Victoria, or is it more just like a guidance and something that people have more important stuff to do than look at that? The question is, does it actually have an impact, and does it really reduce e-waste going to landfill? The reality is that e-waste recycling is increasingly easy to do, and clearly both jurisdictions, Victoria and New South Wales, I don't have the details in front of me for other states and territories, but clearly they all want to prevent e-waste going to landfill. E-waste, for a number of reasons. Firstly, it has valuable materials in it, so precious metals and different things that can be readily recycled for profit. So that's the first thing. The second thing is clearly there's an environmental risk and impact from e-waste, dumped in landfill, where it decays and emits or can emit toxic materials, certain things like cadmium and different minerals and materials that are inside the e-waste as it rots away. So clearly both jurisdictions want to prevent this going into landfill and prevent those negatives and obviously maximise the positives. The other thing to point out is that pretty much the recycling opportunities available, the options for recycling e-waste, they're pretty similar in both states. You have the more major chains who pick it up. You can drop them off at Officeworks, you can drop off batteries in Aldi, you can drop them off at nearly all council collections facilities in both states will operate that. And then there's a lot of manufacturers where they have recycling plants in place, product stewardship plants, etc., for TV sets and things like that. So they nearly all cross state boundaries in Australia, and so the options for recycling are very similar. Is there a difference in the outcomes between an outright ban and, even if it's in theory not enforced, and probably more of a guidance system in New South Wales? I suppose it's very difficult to measure. If you don't know what's going in the bins, etc., it's very difficult to measure that. I haven't seen details suggesting that Victoria's recycling more or less. In theory, you'd expect it to be slightly more, but I haven't seen that they are recycling more than New South Wales on an e-waste perspective. I suppose the question to me is, should we ban? Should it be illegal? It's a tricky one, because when you put in laws, in theory, you are pressurised, or you have to sort of enforce them. And how would you enforce this sort of stuff except going around and basically taking out people's bins and criticising them for having a small piece of electrical stuff in the bin? I can certainly see the point of this on a macro scale, on a larger scale, or even for larger producers. More industrial companies clearly should not be dumping significant amounts of e-waste in bins. Clearly that issue would be easier to police and would make sense. And I think probably the law in some instances does make sense in that regard. Is it a bad thing to bring in legislation to prevent this sort of stuff? I personally, in this instance, I don't really think it is. It's not hurting people by saying you can't put e-waste in the bin. Clearly we shouldn't be doing that. So there should be, it should be a I suppose it should be our duty to some extent to recycle it, to drop it off where it can be dropped off, or take advantage of the council free services that are available. For residential, in nearly all instances, e-waste it's generally a free service, and for larger amounts, in many instances you can receive a rebate for dropping off larger amounts, volumes or weights of e-waste. It's worth bearing in mind that there are valuable materials in these products. I think the Japanese Olympics, which certainly won't go down as one of the funnest Olympics, but due to the restrictions, etc., added and no crowds, but nearly all the medals, I think, at that Olympics were made from e-waste. The gold, the silver, and bronze, extracted, as far as I remember, just from mobile telephones. So there is significant. There's value in these materials, clearly not in one or two items, but clearly there is, if it's an industrialized system where you can extract these materials, there can be benefits. So it is something we want to be pushing. I think if we're serious about recycling, and I'll be honest, when I say recycling, I suppose you could even argue just preventing valuable materials and toxic materials going into landfill. So I think Australia is getting much more serious, and we're seeing that with the bans and restrictions on single-use plastics, which in many instances is a good thing. So I think if we're being serious, we certainly should not be putting e-waste in landfill. And I'll leave it up to listeners and more to the politicians whether you need to outright ban it and have legal restrictions on it, or whether that even benefits the outcomes. Again, that's more a political issue, but the outcomes are what's important. And I think both states are moving in a very good direction. I look forward to hearing what you think are your viewpoints on this topic. And in the meantime, check out our website, check out our blogs. We constantly publish new information. And remember, recycle. Don't be a waster.